I wish the program head of respiratory health at the Telethon Kids Institute in Perth, Alex, and his colleagues from Curtin University, have conducted an analysis of the chemical composition of the liquids used in e-cigarettes. Their findings are published and are timely, given the change in regulations this month that many liquids containing nicotine cannot be purchased in Australia without a doctor's prescription. As always, when vaping is the topic, opinions are strongly held and hard fought. So, any research that can add to the evidence base is a welcome addition to the debate. Alex Lifecam is my special guest today. So what could we usually expect to find in any liquid? What's on the label? Well, in terms of what's on the label, not much. Usually, they'll have This are the two main parts of it: a propylene glycol and the glycerin, which is often called vegetable glycerin. They make up in 98% of the volume of what's in there. And statements. So they are very experienced and they carry the nicotine. If nicotine's in there, they carry the flavoring, chemicals, of whatever those are in there. And that's the bit that actually makes the aerosol cloud that you breathe in. So the liquids and primarily that, then there's flavor and chemicals, and that can be of list. As long as your arm. There's literally thousands and thousands of chemicals that people have mixed into these things, then some other bits and pieces, that we've discovered that what we found. And that aren't really for any known reason. So some of the chemicals that seem to be sort of like cleaning product type things or derivatives of mammalian metabolism processes. So some sort of contamination during the manufacturing process, right? So I think we weren't expecting to find any mouse pads. Well, don't know. Don't know what it is. It could be mouse poo. It could be any sort of bodily fluid, or anything from a person, or an animal, or whatever. And it's very tiny amounts, but I'm sure you'd find the same sorts of things in a lot of chocolate bars and stuff as well. So, yeah, and in terms of what's on the label in this study, which we did, we actually looked at that in some detail for things like ingredients lists, warning pictograms or text or things like that. And there was very little, like, none of the ones we looked at had an ingredient list of any kind of show you off. And I will just have it's a flavor of like a bee-berry flavor or whatever, and you don't know what sort of mix of things and making that flavor up. They would almost always have the propylene glycol vegetable glycerin ratio on them. And that was quite often not quite correct as to what was actually in the bottle at the time. I'm close to. In most cases. Sometimes it was reversed and most of them had warning labels to sort of say don't use it. If you're pregnant. Keep away from children, that sort of thing. You looked at both new and aged liquids. Why was that important? The main reason we looked at that is because we were trying to see if the sort of normal vaping process where the liquid is heated and cooled many times. Each time someone takes a puff on it, they hold the button down and heat the liquid up to a few hundred degrees. We take it half, stop it, cools down again and repeat. And there's some emergency gym evidence to suggest that sort of repeated, whole heating and cooling process changes the chemical composition of what's in there. So things like propylene, glycol and glycerin, which are the bulk of the liquid and known to break down into other chemicals through that process, many of which are far more toxic than the original chemical. And we also wanted to look at its apart from, that is also looking at whether if you buy any liquid and don't use it for a long period of time and it's just sitting on your shelf, or you use it once and then leave it on the shelf for 6 months, does that also make a change? So that was why we were looking sort of this accelerated aging process to try and replicate that in a faster way rather than waiting 6 months to do it. Did you find nicotine where it shouldn't be? We found nicotine. Yes. So it shouldn't have been in any of them. So these were all purchased as nicotine-free as is the law in Australia, and they all had that as part of their process. They all stated that, and we selected nicotine-free, if that was an option on the website to buy them from, and we found there was only a small lift proportion of the liquids have nicotine in them. And it was at very low levels. So it was a step in the right direction from our 2019 study where we found it was in a lot more and in a lot higher levels. Yeah? That was probably a good thing. There was still there, and it was in 10 to 15% of liquids. Had some nicotine in them, or the aged version of nicotine ring, which indicates that it's contained, has been there in the past and it's oxidized into its alternate form. So tell us a little bit about some of the substances you did find, and how harmful they are, and how we looked for a range of about 30-odd different chemicals, of which about half of them were ones that we suspected would be in the based on our own research and the research other people in other countries. We've looked at liquids before. We also looked at, included in that was a list of polyaromatic hydrocarbons that we thought might be in there because their products have sort of combustion processes. Basically, everything we look for, we found that were expected, and our methodology didn't allow us in this instance to detect things that we weren't looking for. So, we went in with a list of things that we're looking for, and they'll found in them, and every liquid had at least one, and in most cases most of the chemicals we're looking for. There was probably 3 or 4 that were most alarming, I guess, if for want of a better word. So we found a whole lot of stuff. So there was flavor and chemicals. Things like cinnamaldehyde was in there, which gives a cinnamon flavor, as the name suggests, which has some known health effects. It's one of the ones that's been banned in there, in many jurisdictions, including we are now with the new liquid laws which are coming into play. That is, one that causes some known respiratory health effects, even at low concentrations. It does things like cells in your lungs, how they functions, our neutrophil function and other things. So you're ready, click would impair your ability to respond to infections and that sort of thing. One of the ones was benzaldehyde, that was in a lot of the liquids and in quite high concentrations in some instances, and that has a whole range of health effects, which actually one of the ones that's been studied in some detail. One of the concerning things that this does is that it impairs to some extent your body's ability to process nicotine. So if you're using liquids with benzaldehyde in them, which a lot of them do, large proportion of them do, and it has nicotine in it, it kind of disrupts your ability to process that. So you're going to be getting a higher nicotine dose than you would if you're using the same liquid without that chemical in it, and the same applies a menthol. Menthol does the same, works in the same way, and we found that in a whole lot of the liquids as well. Menthol, while we're on that topic, that's like I said, we found that in a lot of them that gives that sort of minty flavor that's quite common in tobacco. Cigarettes has been banned in tobacco cigarettes in a lot of countries because of its known, or is in the process of being banned in others because of its known health effects and the fact that it kind of takes the edge off and allows people who don't like the original, like the flavor of things, to use a lot more, and that has the same sort of properties in that it impairs your